Hello and welcome back to another podcast of the SilmFilm podcast, trying to clarify the podcast episode terminology that so frequently confuses our listeners and ourselves as well.
Ourselves, yes.
More likely, mostly just ourselves. So I am your co-host, Dave Kale, and I am joined as always by the Tolkien professor, Corey Olson, and the Tolkien maven, Trish Lambert. And this is an exciting point in season 3 of the Silmarillion Film podcast, because we are doing that always hotly anticipated moment where we transition from overall season arc planning to outlining our specific episodes. And today we're doing the Rebellion of the Noldor.
That's right.
This is going to be a great one. Although ominously, before we began recording, Corey, you hinted at some potential theoretical problems. So.
Well, not problems exactly, but issues or that have arisen in thinking about the episode. So yeah, there are some kind of bigger issues I guess sort of decisions that we need to make that are going to impact things that we do for a while, I think. So anyway, we'll come to that. We'll come to that soon. But it's gonna be fun. So okay, welcome everybody. So before we get going, 2 quick announcements, because we have 2 fun things coming up that I want to make sure that you know about. Thing number 1, and most urgently, this coming Monday, Signum University's fall classes begin. A bunch of people have signed up to audit our new courses, which should be really great. We're having a course on Norse myths. We're having a new intro to Germanic philology. There's a lot of opportunity to take awesome courses that you've always wanted to take and to learn stuff you've never had a chance to learn before. So I encourage you to go to signumuniversity.org and check out our current courses because they're pretty awesome, and it's almost time to start the semester. So that's number 1. Number 2, on October 7th, we have our first regional conference in the Midwest. This is going to be happening in Iowa, hosted by Hawkeye Community College. And we will have the registration form for that should go up sometime this week on our website. But I just wanted to sort of save the date. If you are anywhere in the Midwest, it's going to be a one-day conference just on Saturday, October 7th. I'm going to be coming out and giving a talk, and there's going to be lots of other people giving presentations, and we'll have lots of fun discussions and everything. So a great opportunity. It costs almost nothing. It costs like $15 for the day. It's going to be, enormous fun, high value fun for that $15 for that day. And we've never done a regional conference out in the Midwest before, so there'll be lots of people who will be closer to this one than they've been to, most, of course, people have often complained that all of our events are on the East Coast. And I know that this isn't going to reach everybody, but we're really excited to start reaching out beyond the East Coast and doing other events. So if you're anywhere near Iowa,
we had to work on the West Coast one too.
We are, yes. Actually, discussions underway for something in the San Diego, LA area sometime next year. So yeah, we're working on that too. And by then
I'll be done with my PhD and I'll actually be able to help.
There you go. Yeah. I would also hint that we are working on a Texas event. TexMoot is definitely going to be happening this coming winter, probably January or maybe early February, probably January. So we're excited to be branching out around the country here. But this
really
one
important question is, when is New Zealand moot?
New Zealand, yeah. Well, not on the schedule yet, but I would love to do an event down in New Zealand or Australia. That would be really great. Anyway, cool. So those are the 2 things that I wanted to make sure to mention to everybody before we begin. Now, and thanks again, as always, to Marie for putting together our outlines and giving us a bunch of feedback from our discussion boards for our discussion here today. So first, we have the context of episode 1, just to remember the things that we have been that we have already decided and been talking about. So the episode 1 is on the rebellion of the Noldor. And the centerpiece of that, of course, is the debate in the torchlit square in Tyrion. So lit by torches because, of course, the trees have just gone out, right? So there's no light in Valinor. Feanor is going to break his banishment, show up in Tyrion, give his big speech, swear his oath, and the Noldor are going to set off. And the plan, of course, is to then do the kinslaying in the second episode. So that's the focus for episode 1, but there are a bunch of things that we need to be thinking about. One thing to sort of recall, we don't need to discuss this because we've talked about it, but to remember, in the frame of this episode, we have Aragorn wanting to leave Rivendell, Gilrain not wanting him to go, and Aragorn sneaking out. So we have the rebellion of Aragorn going on in the frame of this episode. The villain storyline. So Melkor returns to Angband. So one of the things we need to think about is how we integrate the villain storyline here. When Melkor returns, we have him. We need to begin the Melkor, Sauron, Gothmog dynamic there, right? We don't need to spend a whole lot of time necessarily, I think, on politics. That is, we don't need a whole lot of backstage talk, or off in the wings talk between Sauron and his henchmen complaining about stuff and that kind of thing. I think, we don't need too much of that, but we do need to establish like the new normal over there in Thangorodrim. And Thangorodrim is also being erected at this point. Like we have Angband, and Melkor is going to come back to it. So Morgoth returns, and he is going to beef it up, right? In the text, of course, it says that at this time he erects the triple peaks, the mountains up above Angband, which was largely subterranean. So do we, so are we gonna have public works projects going on over there with the bad guys? But the villain storyline brings to mind one of my two big theoretical questions that Dave was mentioning before, and that question is, you may remember that it's at this point in the text that we are told that really interesting. I want to read a little bit, because this is a passage that is really important in the Silmarillion as a whole, and which would be really challenging to depict. But I feel like we have to kind of get at it some way. For now, more than in the days of Autumno, ere his pride was humbled, his hatred devoured him, and in the domination of his servants, and the inspiring of them with lust of evil, he spent his spirit. Nonetheless, his majesty as one of the Valar long remained, though turned to terror, and before his face all save the mightiest sank into a dark pit of fear. The important sentence is how Morgoth's hatred devours him, and how in the domination of his servants and inspiring of them with lust of evil, he spent his spirit. This idea, which is a crucial idea for Morgoth and for Sauron later, frankly, we see the same thing happening there. The idea that the evil guys invest their own power and thereby actually lessen themselves, like their own power, their own essence decreases because dispersed among their enemies. Morgoth, in many ways, might seem idle, right? Like, why does he sit around in Angband and do nothing? In that same paragraph, or the paragraph before, was when we're told that he only ever bears weapons one more time in his entire life, and he almost never comes out of Angband. So, like, why not? Why doesn't he lead his own armies in battle? Especially since, he's like a Vala and no elf couldn't possibly stand against him, right? Why doesn't he just, get off his butt, pick up his sword, and go out and fight himself, right? When the answer is that's not what he does. But that doesn't mean he's being idle, right? There's a real risk of depicting Morgoth as just like sitting there and like letting other people who are less competent and less powerful than he do his work, right? Which seems sort of a strange thing to do, arguably, right? And might create potentially a kind of a problem. So, yeah, Robert, exactly. It's the Morgoth's Ring concept. So my question is, what do we do with this? Is there a way we can show this or represent it? Is this something that we have to make? I mean, this occasionally, I mean, there are sometimes things which are sort of vague and invisible, right? Sort of spiritual things that are happening, which sometimes you can effectively in a visual adaptation make into an outward thing, right? In order to point to the inward thing that's actually happening. So what do we do with this? How do we handle it?
You mean specifically, is there a way to visually represent his diminishing?
Well, there are a couple elements of it, right? One is his diminishing. Two is, I guess, though, to me, the even bigger question is, how do we convey that he's doing something? Because he is doing something, right? What he's doing, so the question...
You don't think it'll work to just, show him shooting fireballs into things?
Well, he could shoot fireballs into... That's the thing, like, the question is, why doesn't he shoot fireballs into things, right? I mean, if you're Morgoth, wouldn't you shoot fireballs into things? I mean, I kind of feel like I would, but no, that's not what he does. But it's not because he doesn't do anything, right? And it's not because what he does is less effective than shooting fireballs into things. What he does is more effective than shooting fireballs into things. But it's less easily represented on screen than shooting fireballs. Do you see what I mean? Yeah, so Robert says turning a beast into a monster. Yeah, so Robert, you're thinking of like examples that we can give to actually show him putting forth his power and investing creatures with evil will. Now, we've shown monsters, right? We had a monster scene, like the beasts of Horn, and you remember that we had a hunting scene, right? With Orome and Tulkas in the previous season, in season 1 rather. And we do have, exactly, Nick, we do have his monster army in the final episode, the climactic battle. He's got his, like, monstrous forces. So we've seen him doing this kind of thing before, and that's good. But, yeah, so Dave, it's really the two issues, right? One is, again, do we show him being active? How do we convey that he is active, despite the fact that he's staying home? Right? And not intervening personally. And then second, can we and how do we show his own sort of diminishment? The diminishment is kind of a less urgent issue because the diminishment is over time and it doesn't have to be until, I mean, I don't think we have to make an issue of that until later on. I would think that the first moment where we really want to depict the unexpected weakness of Melkor, the fact that he has diminished to some extent, is in the duel with Fingolfin, right?
Okay.
There we can show, because he's going to get wounded, and that's a big deal. That will never have happened before.
Right.
So we've got some time, and that's going to be what? That's going to be the end of season 4. So we have some time before we have to show him being weakened. We got 2 seasons before any evidence of his weakness needs to be in evidence.
So I feel like the diminishment thing is not that hard, probably not that hard to do. Like, can't we kind of gradually change his physical appearance to make him start to look kind of withered and weak? Or withereder and weaker, at least. Like that, and also, as you say, the duel will be the point to really drive that. Will be the opportunity to really drive that home, to show him being, vulnerable. Still overpowering to Fingolfin, but at least vulnerable enough that he gets hurt and he's afraid. So I don't know. Would you agree with that? That the diminishment thing actually maybe isn't that tricky. We can do things visually that would work.
And through dialogue. I mean, it can come up.
That's true. You can just use exposition.
Right.
I am dramatically weaker now.
Exactly. That's super compelling, isn't it? But I mean, it would be easy enough to have a conversation between like Sauron and one of his underlings, right? As one of Sauron's advisors. Well, let's see. Thurin-Gwethil isn't going to be around that long. Draugluin is going to be around that long. Tevildo's probably not long. Who's he going to have? He's not going to be able to keep anybody, is he? We've got
No.
Yeah, he's going to be on his own after season 5, pretty much. Except for Shelob. Shelob will still be around. But she's never really an advisor, per se.
Preferably in sexy, feminine, humanoid
Hey,
form.
that's a great idea. Yeah, let's give Shelob a sexy female human form. Yeah, that's a brilliant idea. Why didn't anybody ever think of that before?
Right. Yeah, where did that come from?
I know.
So on the question of him exerting, so is the idea here, the concern here, that we want him to be, we want the audience to see him as formidable and dangerous, and that we're not going to be able to do it by having him, like I think we're probably all in agreement that we're not going to pull a Lord of the Rings Sauron where we have him marching around in a suit of armor at battles, knocking 50 people at a swing of a mace.
Right.
Like, we don't want to do that. We want to skew more toward the books where he's more consistent, where he doesn't personally come out fight, that he does it by investing his power in servants and slaves. Is the concern that if we don't do this well, that the audience will perceive him as cowardly and weak, and we don't want that? Is that kind of the concern?
Yeah, I mean, I guess
I'm just being devil's advocate. Like, why are we worried about this?
Why? I guess, and maybe I'm worried about this too much. Maybe this won't come up. I mean, but the question is, it's hard for me to not ask, why doesn't he? Or rather, I mean, if I were viewing this, like I agree, we don't want him out like Sauron in the film, clearing people out with his mace. But the question is, why wouldn't he? Like, why would he not do that? I mean, it's one thing to have him acting like the Godfather, right? To have him sitting in his inner sanctum and having his captains come to him and, and him giving orders and people kissing his ring and stuff. Like, having him in that kind of a Godfather commander role is fine. And goodness knows, I mean, I raised the Godfather not to make fun of it, but to point to it as actually a really good model, right? I mean, the Godfather is kind of like that Vito Corleone is kind of terrifying, even though he doesn't do anything himself, right? And so having him in that role...
Yeah, I would agree, and I would argue that I don't think The Godfather 2, where they show his backstory, while interesting, doesn't make him any scarier.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't.
Right.
But
like seeing him run around with a gun and shoot people doesn't actually necessarily increase his scariness. But,
agreed. But here's the problem. Imagine Vito Corleone is played. Imagine somebody with the physique of Arnold Schwarzenegger playing Vito Corleone, right? The question that would constantly be happening is, like, basically, if he were literally the biggest, strongest, most formidable person in his entire world, right? In his entire, and yet all he did was sit in the back room and give orders. Like, I'm not saying that wouldn't still be scary, but it would be kind of like the gun on stage, like, why doesn't he act, especially if he's losing, right? Especially if his enemies are his armies are flailing and he's still sitting there. The question is, like, well, so why are you not doing anything other than giving orders? Like, and again, Tolkien has an answer to this. I'm not saying this is a problem with Tolkien's story. It's not. But because the answer is he is doing something, and he is doing something which is really more effective if he were just out there personally swatting flies. Like if he just picked up his hammer and went out there and started pounding on people. He can only be in one place at once, right? Whereas, you know, his armies and his lieutenants and his science experiments and everything else, you know, it's much better to invest himself in armies and armies of orcs than to just personally go out and fight one-on-one with lots of people in a row, right? So again, my point is not that there's a hole in the story. My question is, how can we depict that to convey both that he has that kind of Godfather role, that he is the terrifying commander that even all of the most horrible members of the enemy armies are terrified of and submit to in fear. Fear, again, is the thing that in that paragraph Tolkien emphasizes, that fear is the dominant motif of all of Angband. Everyone is terrified of Melkor. But again, how do we show that he is doing something and not merely sitting idle when he could be out there, doing something? Do you see what I mean?
Right. I see what you're saying. With the Godfather, there's kind of no question of why isn't he out there doing, because
right.
when we one, he doesn't look like the sort of person who would be able to do anything individually himself, and two, we never see him in a moment where he appears to be losing and it seems like there's something he could have done about it.
Right. Right.
Whereas in the case of Morgoth, there is sort of we'll have invested a great deal of effort in previous seasons to make it clear that he is the single most powerful figure than the Circle of Garda, and there will be multiple moments throughout the series where he will be losing. And especially people who've seen Lord of the Rings in the past will wonder, like, oh, couldn't he have gotten out there? And in fact, don't they in the Lord of the Rings prologue, isn't there even specifically exposition that states that the men and the elves were winning until Sauron took the field himself?
Yes. Yeah. And no one could possibly stand against him. Exactly.
That's right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's
people have that in their minds when they're watching Morgoth's armies lose to the Elves and Valerian. So okay, I see.
Yeah.
It could potentially be a little bit of a problem.
Right.
But what can we do that's not going to look hokey?
Right. Exactly. So let's address the harder question first, which is, assuming that we are going to, I mean, we are going to try to capture this idea of him putting forth his own power in, you know, sort of investing his minions with some of his power. Let's think first about how we represent that. The obvious opportunity we have here is with the super secret necromantic orc project, right? Especially given the fact that this is under new management, and we had already talked about how we wanted to emphasize the new management here, right? How Sauron was already working on the elvish captives that he had taken, and he was wanting to make them into servants and followers, even disciples, right? He was trying to make disciples for himself and worshippers of Melkor, but he was not interested in making mindless, hate-filled slaves, right, who would leap mindlessly into battle against their enemies. That hadn't necessarily been his vision for the elves, you know, for the captive elves. You know, we had mentioned before, I think the phrase we were using was something like he was trying to make converts, not you know, to use them as sort of raw materials to create these sort of new minions. The orcs, therefore, when he comes and takes over the orc project and he twists them into orcs, that is, I mean, by the way, that is my understanding of how Tolkien saw that working. That is, I mean, even if you go way back to the Book of Lost Tales days, when Morgoth is making the elves from scratch, hatred is still one of the prime ingredients. I mean, it's sort of the active ingredient in Orcs, right? Is hatred. And it's his own hatred, right? He is embodying his own hatred in the Orcs. And that is something that seems still to happen later on when they are converted elves. And the only answer, it's not a fully satisfying answer, as Tolkien himself didn't find it fully satisfying, but the only answer to the question which is so often asked, namely, why do orcs have free will, right? What happens to the free will of orcs? The answer, which again, as I said, neither Tolkien nor I thinks it's a fully satisfactory answer, but the answer to that question is, it doesn't matter, because if they do have free will, their will is overridden by the will first of Morgoth and then of Sauron. So they are corrupted, they are dominated, they are driven to what they do. Now again, that's not a fully satisfactory answer, but nevertheless, that does seem to be the answer. So the orcs are the clearest instance of him putting out his power, of his investing some of what he has in his minions to make them stronger.
So that's kind of our first solution, that we have to be very careful when putting the Orc project on screen, to really show sort of exactly how that's working and how he's pouring his power into those servants.
Yeah, I would say so, because of we have the two most obvious opportunities we have for showing Melkor putting forth his spirit into his servants is the orcs and the dragons. Because Glaurung is not yet in, at this point, he's not even really begun the R&D stage with Glaurung the dragon. In a sense, the monsters he's already created are kind of prototypes, right? So we're going to need to be thinking about... Glaurung is really a season 4 question, right? Obviously, we're not going to bring Glaurung in here. He's going to appear in season 4 because he's going to be one of the chief instruments of the Battle of Sudden Flame, with which we're going to end season 4. And there's that moment when he comes out and gets chased back by Fingon and his archers, which can be an event from earlier in season 4. So we can think about the actual development and rationale of Glaurung the dragon near the beginning of season 4. But my point is that's just sort of another obvious example of or a moment when we can depict him doing this kind of thing. See, our season 3 opportunity is the orcs. So, Dave, I guess we could just kind of leave it there and leave it for people to kind of discuss. We can sort of leave it to the discussion board to think about that a little bit more.
Maybe very briefly, let's comment on maybe even the visuals of it, right? Like this idea of okay, so we're going to use the super secret necromantic orc project as sort of our device for showing Morgoth pouring his power into his servants. But how specifically do we communicate that? Is it mostly visuals, where we kind of have a scene where he's staying there kind of with his hands raised, and there's some kind of light coming off his fingers going down into the little orc guys, right? Or is it going to have to be exposition? Do we need to have Sauron spelling it out to somebody next to him? All right, so here's what's going on.
Right. Sauron doing color commentary on the creation of the orc. Well, it wouldn't be that big of a deal to have Sauron complaining about it, to Thorin Gwethel, right? Because his boss has come in and taken over his project and taken it in a completely different direction, right? So
yeah. No, that is true. It would be. I'm just thinking we could show this notion of. You can show this notion of Morgoth pouring power or whatever into his slaves, but that doesn't quite communicate the strategic value of doing this. I feel like that's a second point that
right.
Maybe that's where that might require some exposition. Someone actually explaining on screen, and why is this a good idea? Why can't he? Why would he want to why would he want to diminish himself, like pour out his own power into other creatures? How is this going to help him? Wouldn't he want to hoard his power? So somebody needs to like comment on like, oh no, he's empowering his armies to be able to sweep over Beleriand or something like that.
Right. Yeah, there's on
that note, it's kind of interesting. The Lord of the Rings films, it's kind of just taken for granted. Like the ring really is kind of a MacGuffin in the films, maybe even in the books to an extent. The ring really is kind of a MacGuffin in the sense that no one ever really explains why it is. There's this line where all he needs to cover the land in the second darkness is this ring.
Right.
No one ever explains like why or how does that work.
Right.
Why is it that if Sauron gets this ring, he'll suddenly be able to spread chaos and darkness over the land? And so maybe we don't have to, like, I would say I would definitely want to not over explain it, but maybe some kind of if we can find some way to write not corny dialogue between a couple of his lieutenants discussing it, that could be useful and interesting.
Or even, as Rickle is suggesting here, even the idea of having somebody challenge him or question him. Maybe we actually have a discussion amongst, Sauron and Morgoth and Gothmog at some point to sort of say like, hey, aren't you weakening yourself by doing this? That doesn't seem like a great idea. Or even Gothmog asking sort of, from his sort of thuggish perspective, why don't you come out into battle yourself and thump them, right? I could imagine Gothmog asking that question. Now, everyone's got to be terrified of him, so this conversation has to happen very carefully, but...
What if we had a rebellious Balrog red shirt who makes like a intemperate comment about this? Yeah. Right. And then what we see is we see a gaggle of empowered orcs take him down, which is something that was maybe previously believed to be impossible. So we get a visual illustration. Why would you do this? And then we see something happen, and we're like, oh, okay, there you go. Like I feel like that would potentially be more effective than in dialogue or exposition.
Yeah. No, I see what you mean. Yeah, I thought you were going to say that the Balrog in question gets penalized by being locked up under mountains down in the south. But
or maybe he gets driven out by the orcs and then he flees their hides.
Right, exactly. Well, the other thing I was thinking of here too is, remember we had talked about the character of Boldog, and who is like the great super orc, who is the leader of the orcs, and he might be an opportunity as well. If we show Morgoth basically making Boldog, I mean, he would be taking one of the elf prisoners in particular and not only twisting him into an orc, but promoting him into the like captain and general of the orcs. And so a double or triple portion of the bit of his spirit that he puts into all of the orcs gets put into Boldog, and that would be later on. So Marie just has kind of come in late. Hey Marie, glad you could make it. I'm not saying we do Boldog in this episode, Marie. I've started with this theoretical question that thinking about the villain storyline generated. So we're thinking about the general question. So anyway, okay. Yeah, we can keep thinking about this a little bit more. I just wanted to raise the issue because I think it's a super important issue for us to be thinking about. It was on my mind not only as I was thinking about the villain storyline, but as I was reading the section on the Flight of the Noldor, rereading the Flight of the Noldor chapter for today. And of course, that paragraph that I read earlier is in there, and so it was making me think of it even more. But anyway, okay, all right. So let's get to the second theoretical question raised by the one little last final tag that Marie put at the bottom of this slide, which is no Valar or Teleri in this episode. Interesting question. Okay, so this is my biggest question, in the sense of having most overarching implications. How much do we want to leave the Valar behind now that it's come to the point, right? And we're actually thinking about, we've talked about this before, right? How the Valar are going to be of central importance in season 1 and 2, and then they're going to kind of fade away, as of course there's very little reference through most of the Silmarillion and almost all of the Lord of the Rings, very little reference to the Valar and what the Valar are up to. We don't get very much, meanwhile, back in Valinor's stuff going on. Do we want to? Let me put it this way. Maybe. I just want to throw out the possibility. Do we consider continuing with the Valar? Obviously not having them be protagonists, right? But do we want to recall them? Do we want to be bringing them in? Do we want to get their reactions? Do we want to emphasize the contributions that they are still making, even though they're not appearing in person? We could possibly do that.
I think we do need to find a way to do that, because, even though they're not mentioned, if I recall correctly from the letters, Tolkien was pretty blunt about the fact that, they were still active. They were still doing things. We know they are, right?
Yes.
Went from the west when Saruman's spirit goes.
Yes.
And,
yes.
And other things. So there's two things. One is, if we're going to take them away, we shouldn't go cold turkey. We need to somehow phase them out. But I do think, more importantly, what you just said, somehow we need to find a way to keep them still engaged in the story, because they do have.
Yes.
They do take action, even though it's off stage in the book and movie.
Yeah, and exactly. I agree with Marielle that we don't want to be depicting, like, as she says, the Valian water cooler. Right? We don't want to just occasionally go back to have a few of them hanging out, being like, "Dude, have you seen what Turin has done this time? Can you believe that guy? What should we?" So yeah, just having them kind of standing around and commenting. Obviously, we don't necessarily want that, but there are moments, and there certainly will be moments when we're going to have direct or even indirect intervention, just showing them taking an interest and then leaving it to the viewer to sort of speculate about what role the Valar might have played in these particular episodes. Do
we know for certain that the Valar did not come to Middle-earth, even in disguise, if you will, covertly? I know, like, oh my God, I can't believe, Olmo, of course, kind of hangs out at the shore. But do we know that they didn't? Would that be a horrible, transgression on our part if we wove them in by having them actually witnessing certain things? I don't know. That might be kind of schlocky, but. Well,
is there a reason? Is there a very definite reason why we would say they would never? No, I don't think that we do have a real mandate against that necessarily.
Of course, who could actually be the conduit to Valinor is Tom Bombadil. There you go. He's like the eyes and ears.
Tom Bombadil's spy master. I'm not. He's deep. He's deep That's undercover, right. Man. He is deep undercover. Yeah. Well, exactly as Tony Mead was reminding us, it's like the theory that Gandalf is actually Manwë, right?
Right.
The fact that
there's been theories, haven't there, that Tom Bombadil and Goldberry are Yavanna and Aule, I think it was.
Well, sure. That's a that's a very natural kind of theory to have, right? I don't think it's true, but certainly.
Well, I think Aule would have had to change quite a bit to be worrying about, birds and badgers, but okay.
Yeah, he's not very much like Aule, I have to say. No. Apart from his choice in wives, but But yeah, Halstein, I'm thinking the same thing. Even just the idea of actually a verse transcript of one of Tom Bombadil's intelligence reports, in his normal meter and style would be awesome, right? I mean, like, we can't do this, but that has to happen, right? That needs to exist. We need to have like the intelligence report of Tom Bombadil spy, right? In
Hey doll, Mary doll.
Exactly. In trochaic heptameter, with lots of ring-a-dong dillos, interspersed at certain points.
Manway gets it and he just looks over at Bart and just rolls his eyes.
This would be great. Yeah.
Who
no.
picked this guy?
Yeah. That needs to happen. Right.
That'd be a great brothers workshop.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Exactly. Yeah. But anyway, yeah. So we can, in a sense, season 3 gives us an opportunity to break in gently to this question, because it's very clear, like, the Valar have to be involved in season 3. Like, there's no question about that. We are told, even when they are doing nothing, we are told that they have deliberately chosen to do nothing, right? So the actions of the Valar, they're involved literally from the beginning to the end of this season. They're involved in choosing to let Feanor do his thing, though they send the herald to banish Feanor. Then we've got the don't stop them from leaving, but what's her name? Uanin. See, this is again a problem with studying the book of the history of Middle-earth too closely. I was like, Owen? No, what's her name? Uanin, yes. So, and her going ahead and like creating the storm and wrecking the ships anyway. We've got then, of course, the debate, the council that their actual discussion, which we get the and yet remain evil conversation. We get, of course, Mandos going to deliver the doom of the Noldor, and then even at the very end of the season, when Manwë needs to be hearing this supplication. I mean, I know we're not going to get the rescue of Maedhros in this at the end of this season, but still, remember the prayer that Fingon offers up to Manwë, and the eagle that's sent to him. So again, Manwë's paying attention, right? And we know that Manwë's paying attention. So I think we certainly have the Valar. We're going to have them in the background, but we'll have an opportunity in season 3 to kind of play with this a little bit, interspersing conversation among the Valar. And frankly, I think this needs to happen in episode 1. The question of, or, maybe we could push it off till the beginning of episode 2, but that decision, Manwë's choice to not intervene, right, to allow the Noldor to make their own choice and leave, despite the fact that many of the Valar are really upset with them and feel aggrieved at what Feanor is saying. They all feel, it's like they all can hear what Feanor says. I mean, they object to the words that he uses. It's nothing that goes on in Tirion is secret from the Valar, apparently. Anyway, so it's whether we work it into episode 1, as I say, or start episode 2 with it, the fact that the Valar know what's going on, and the debate that they have about how they should respond or not respond to those events, we need to do that. I mean, I think that absolutely has to happen. We don't necessarily have to depict it all on screen, but we should think about it. And again, it gives us an opportunity, I think, through this season to be thinking about some kind of models that we might use or not use for later on as we move forward. But wanted to raise that. In general, I am pro showing more Valian intervention in Middle-earth, because I do think that it does happen, and I think that we can show that without being hokey. we have to be careful about that, but I do think that we can show that. Okay. Well, with that in mind, Maria, I'm sure.
Personally,
yes.
I was
go
going
ahead.
to say, I think showing the valor intervening is an excellent opportunity for like a musical number in every episode, where Almo is playing some song for the elves.
A musical number. Yeah. That's it's a good plan, Dave. It's a great plan.
Well, that's why I'm here.
Okay. All right. Well, let's think about the actual plot of the episode then, having addressed my larger theoretical concerns here. So there were a few suggestions from the discussion board. One was to begin in Angband, since this will tie into both Noldor and Beleriand. Now, I would say, actually, I kind of like that idea. I would recall especially that we end with that too, right? Establishing Morgoth on the throne in Angband is one of the final images of the climax, not the climax, but of the culmination of season 2. So starting there would not be crazy. We have the other suggestion is to begin with Finwë's funeral procession from Formonos. Which raises a really interesting question because, as I know the discussion boards were very interested in this week, funerals. There's not a whole lot of precedent for funerals. In fact, really, it's kind of Finwë and Finwë's wife, right? There's like, 2 people now who have died. And this will be really the first one that we show, Marie. Yeah. So it's not like they have funerary customs exactly. Because you think, even back in Cuiviénen, right, there were some folks who vanished, right, who were abducted. But did anybody else die? I don't think we would have had any other fatalities. There would have been some probably who died on the road across Middle-earth, but even there, I would not think that the casualty rate would be exceptionally high among the elves crossing Middle-earth. So they can be killed, but for most, this is going to be really their first. Muriel has died. That's the only death so far.
And I kind of wonder. I sort of feel like, I certainly feel like I on the one hand, visually starting with the funeral would be kind of look nice, and it would be moving, emotionally. On the other hand, I feel like maybe that portrays the nature of the elves. Like it would, if we just started with the funeral, it would make it seem like this is a common, like this is a routine, this is a commonplace ritual that they have, which I kind of like. I'm leaning toward more like showing maybe some consternation about exactly what to do. Yes, because they obviously don't have traditions. And what would the elves do with the body? Would they bury it? Would they erect a tombstone? Would there be a memorial? See, those are human things. Because those are things that a lot of those things, like burying or whatever, like, those have like a very specific purpose in our world. Right? Well, and like, do they even have a notion of decay? Do dead bodies decay in across the sea? Right. Do elves who die in Valinor decay? Now, there's a question I've never asked myself. We're asking all the really difficult questions. Golly, that is an interesting question. Yeah. Now, Marie points out that Muriel's body doesn't decay, right? But of course, as Hakan was pointing out, of course, which I hadn't been emphasizing, but yeah, Muriel didn't exactly die in a normal way anyway. Her body's not like, her body isn't like 100% dead. It's just that her spirit's gone. Right. So it's more like, Muriel is in an immortal vegetative state, essentially, but So actually, it's not even like we have an on-screen precedent of
no.
Oh, well, someone died before, so they figured it out then, because that's a completely weird one-off.
Yeah. So I mean, Finwë will be the first corpse, like the first legitimate corpse, in the history of Valinor, and
what a auspicious honor.
Yeah.
Now,
yeah.
also, I'm thinking, I don't know how significant this would be, so it may not be all that significant, but it would be interesting to see, however it is they create this funeral for Finwë, it's something that the Noldor take with them to Middle-earth, and it then gets passed to other elf cultures. So even in season 20, even when we're in like the Third Age, during the Wars with Sauron, we still see whatever this funeral.
Right. Yeah, no, that's why this is a big deal, right? Because this is the first elf corpse, but this is not the last elf corpse,
no,
right?
By
no means. Yeah. And so we are going to need, so it does bear some interesting thinking, because as we've said before, one of the really interesting challenges of trying to depict Tolkien's elves is not just projecting onto them human conventions. And anytime we just kind of defer to the way that people in cultures with which we're familiar normally do things, is kind of a cop-out, right? How would an immortal creature, how would an immortal bound, they know, right? The elves are not leaving Arda. Finwë's spirit has not left Arda, even though, he has gone to Mandos and they won't see him for a long time. He's not gone. And more importantly, like his body, I'm inclined to think, and tell me what you guys think about this, but I'm inclined to think that the elves would kind of care less about the body than humans do. Don't you think? Because, I mean, the Hroa, like, how important is that? Right? It's not that they would treat it with disrespect or something, or just like, dump it in the compost heap in the backyard. But at the same time, the elves would be much more aware than humans are that the body is a vessel, and eventually a new vessel will be made for that spirit which hasn't departed from Arda. It's just in Mandos for a while. So this is why I don't think there would be any, like, tombstones, or even if there's a burial. I mean, they've got to do something with the corpse, right? But even if there's a burial or something, there would not be like a monument, because a monument.
Would they do a pyre?
Maybe. Would they burn the body? I don't know.
Here's a quick question. Are they cognizant of the fact that they could go down to the halls of Mandos and just say hello to a dead elf?
Are there visiting hours I don't think there are visiting hours in Mandos.
I think we talked about that, didn't we? Earlier on, we said no, there wouldn't be. There'd be like a separation of spirit from corporeal.
That's true. But
How about if Olmo takes him? And it's just a mysterious thing? I mean, it's like, the implication being he's going to have a sea burial.
Are they aware of the fact that the dead elves are going down into the halls of Mandos?
Well, that's a great question, and Tony Mead was just asking that same question. How do they know? Would the Valar tell them, and when did the Valar tell them? And goodness knows, no one's been told on screen yet, so our viewers aren't going to know.
So that's a good point, but I now feel like, in thinking about it, I feel a pretty strong conviction that they would know, that they do know somehow. However we choose to handle that on screen, I feel like they should know and do know, just because of the simple fact that they draw a direct comparison with the men. Like the fact that it's such a contentious point with men. This idea that like you die and you go, no, not with her. And, and there's repeated discussions about, we don't know what your fate is. It's apart from ours, blah, blah, blah. So I feel like the elves should know.
And the significance of grandiose tombs for the Númenóreans and the Gondorians as well. Yeah.
So I feel like specifically we should contrast
Yes.
We should contrast the elves with the men, which suggests that we should definitely do the opposite of what happens with the Numenorians. And I kind of feel like I feel like if they know, like, well, sure, he's dead, but he's not really dead. He's still here. He's down in the halls of Mandos and blah, 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 and he couldn't come back. I kind of feel like I sort of agree with you, Corey, that there wouldn't really be much concern about the body. That there wouldn't be things like, why would you put up a memorial or a marker?
No.
For someone who's not actually in? They've just gone someplace else.
Right. Clearly not a memorial, right? I mean, because a memorial is to memorialize someone who's gone, and he's not gone, right? I mean, in fact, I would think that the whole like memorial / mausoleum culture of Numenor would be not only repugnant to the elves, but completely like puzzling. I mean, it would just look supremely weird to them that you would erect monuments to dead people. Like, why on earth would you erect monuments to dead people? To an elf, that would be nonsensical, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, and now Nick reminds us that we did have a little bit of a conversation when Muriel died about Mando saying that she's not coming back. And I agree, Nick, but my problem, Nick, is that Muriel is such a weird case. I mean, she's not like the prototype of elvish death. And having that happen with her first creates the possibility that in our viewer's mind, she becomes the prototype of elvish death, and they think that all the elves are off there and their bodies are in an eternal vegetative state in Lorien, which is not the case. Could Mandos take the body away? I mean, we could just put some mystery over it, like they don't know what happens to the body, but it's not like Mandos is going to come to, or Mandos or his servants are going to come trucking all the way to the battlefields of Middle-earth to haul off the bodies. So we still have to have the elves dispose of the bodies in some way or other eventually. So we might as well not dodge the question now.
That's a good question. Well, we could have them treat it differently in Valinor. Like, I could kind of see how the Valar might not want to just, like, it might seem kind of weird to just leave anybody's dead body lying around for all to see.
Yeah.
See why maybe they might come get it, but I don't know if I'm not sure I want to make it like a true mystery where the elves are like, well, when somebody dies, so-and-so comes and takes their body and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Like, for one thing, I don't think we want to turn the Valar into, like, Grim Reaper figures.
Right.
But I also feel like that might contradict the notion that the elves have like, they know what happens. They have a pretty strong conviction.
Remember, we do get funeral...
Well, how much of the episode... Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, we do get funeral mounds. Fingolfin and Finrod both are buried in mounds.
Maybe something different. Maybe they handle it differently in Middle-earth versus Valinor.
Right. It could be, but then what do we do with them in Valinor?
Yeah. Well, okay. So what's a reason to have a funeral mound or something like that in Middle-earth versus Valinor?
Well,
protect the body from desecration.
Yes, that's explicitly the reason in Middle-earth. Remember also, in the case of Finrod, right, how the burial of his body on the island basically cleanses it, right? That was his stronghold, which Sauron had taken and made foul, right? And the island is sort of cleansed by his sort of barrow at the top. So
could the Valar get involved? I mean, in the Valinor version, could the Valar get involved? I mean, I was thinking, like, for example, Yavanna or oh my God, I can't believe I can't remember people's names. Nienna could like sit vigil over the body or something, and then it's sort of like I don't know. I mean, I was just thinking that somehow, in other words, it's like a return of the body to Arda somehow.
Right.
I don't want it to be like, a fast frame of the body decomposing.
Right.
But
we could have
something like that.
We could have a burial site of some kind on Taniquetil, the holy mountain, which would be kind of cool. But I'm not sure that isn't making too much of it. Again, like.
Or what about Tyrion? I mean, actually, it would make more sense, wouldn't it, to have it on Tyrion?
But then they'd have to have a tomb, wouldn't they? I mean, wouldn't they have to build something then?
Well, see, now I'm back to my suggestion that Ulmo takes him. That basically the implication is he is going to be returned to Arda, but it'll be a sea burial, which would also then, have to come up with a different thing to do in Middle Earth, hence the mounds, because Ulmo isn't exactly going to come, inland to gather bodies up. So I don't know. I mean, that's another possibility. But as you can tell, my theme is around, like you said, it's a vessel.
Yeah.
So that the logical thing is it would get returned to Arda. In other words, it would get recycled, if you will.
Exactly. Exactly. And so definitely on the recycling front, the more I've thought about it, elvish bodies have to decay. I mean, they have to decay. Because even in Valinor, they have to decay because Finwë is eventually going to want a new body. Right, he's going to eventually create it. It's not like he's going to return to the old one. I mean, his head got bashed in, right? So we're not going to have them like, let's repair the mechanical damage to the corpse of Finwë so that his spirit can re-inhabit it at some point, a couple millennia down the road. Like that we're not going to have like a reconstructing surgery business with the. So yeah, so that can't happen. So the bodies decay, and as you say, it's a recycling thing, right? Like their flesh is made of the stuff of Arda and goes back to the stuff of Arda. Right. Their spirits don't leave Arda.
I mean, to me, that would be especially applicable to the elves.
Sure.
I mean, in a like given their tie to the Arda.
Right. Right.
And the fact that I think, as you say, and I think it would be easy to make clear that the elves don't consider the body of anything of much import in the sense of, I mean, it is just a vessel.
Maybe we just have something like not associated with any other thing, like not on Taniquetil, just like a field where the elves are a bit like, the field of, they would name it something, right? I mean, it would be called something like the field of, what would they call it? They wouldn't call it the field of death. They wouldn't call it the field of the, but
renewal?
It's like, the field of renewal, no, because that suggests that new life comes from there. But, but like that,
it could be just a big blue container. Bigfoot body. I'm sorry.
Right, the Elvish recycle bin. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
the field of remembrance.
Well, see,
but see, Tony, remembrance is exactly what they would not be associating with corpses. Right. That's one of the chief differences, right? Because for humans, it's all about the memory. Like we have to keep alive the memory of the one who is gone. But the whole premise of that is that they're gone, right? It's the departure in like
the field of reverence. How about the field of reverence? They revere the vessel that the spirit was in, and that's so it's reverence, but it's not like they know that the spirit's not gone, the elf's not gone. Right. Something like that? No?
Well, though that would imply that they're like revering the dead or the bodies of the dead, which gets a little close to ancestor worship or like that kind of area.
Are we so are we saying that do we think we were treating Finwë differently from Miriel? Because I pulled out I went back to the Unchaining of Melkor chapter, and here's what it says. It says, she, Miriel, went to the gardens of Lorien, lay down to sleep, but though she seemed to sleep, her spirit indeed departed from her body and passed into silence in the halls of Mandos. The maidens of Esti tended the body of Miriel, and it remained unwithered.
Yes.
She did not return. So what should we take from that? Do we take from that no elves' bodies do not decay? Do we take from that Miriel's different, or do we take from that she remained unwithered because the maidens of Este tended her?
But they can't be bothered to tend everybody.
That's it.
The workload of the maidens of Este is just too high to deal with every single elvish corpse that comes along. Yeah,
because there's so many.
Right.
Well, I do wonder. So several people made the point in the comments, which maybe this addresses this a little bit. Do we, suppose the Valar showed up and said, "All right, well, the bring out your dead, like, let's have your dead body. We're going to take him over to the Main's Vestige." Fëanor maybe might be reluctant to give him up, and it could be, and several folks. Nick asked the question: do we really think Fëanor wouldn't want a memorial to his father? And it's sort of, on the one hand, I'm kind of reluctant to do that because I really do want to show the elves treating death differently. But maybe this could be a sign of Fëanor's corruption, that he kind of responds inappropriately to death. He refuses to give up the body. He insists on some kind of burial. He insists on a monument, something that kind of draws a connection between him and what we'll see with the Númenóreans later.
Right. Well, I agree that there should be issues. We know he has Valar issues, right? And so the idea of and this was something somebody, I forget who it was, had mentioned a while ago, which is that if the Valar did want to come in, and if the Valar have some role in the funerary customs of elves, Fëanor's going to object, right? I mean, we know that Fëanor is, whatever is the ultimate fate of the corpse of Finwë, Fëanor's going to personally oversee it, right? I mean, there's no question about that. And he is probably going to take umbrage if the Valar come in and be like, "Hey, we're going to dispose of the body of your father." I don't think he's going to have any of that. So we have to make the decision. If we want the burial of Finwë to be suggesting essentially kind of normal elvish practice, or setting a precedent for what will become normal elvish practice, then we can't have Fëanor get weird about it, or get too weird about it. I like the idea of showing his... I mean, Dave, I do think that impulse to sort of show Fëanor's corruption through this is a good one. But I'm not sure that I want that particular kind, because that's a human... Like what happens with the Númenóreans, that's a human thing. And I don't know that... See, my answer to the question, can we really believe that Fëanor would not want a memorial to his father, is yes, I can believe that, because the memorial impulse is a fundamentally human impulse. If Fëanor understands that his father is not gone, but his father is in Mandos, his father's spirit is in Mandos, he's not going to be, the impulse is not going to be to memorialize him, to raise a monument, remembering the life of Finwë. Finwë is still alive in Mandos. His flesh is dead. His Hroa is inactive, but his spirit is still alive, and it's still not far away, and he knows this. He is separated from it. If anything, what I can see is that grievance. I could see him getting ticked off at Mandos and being like, "Hey, I want to see Dad," and Mandos being like, "No, you can't do that," and him being like, "I don't care, I want to see Dad." So like him grudging at the fact that he's separated from them would seem to be And Phil, I agree with you. Phil Boswell says they'd be remembering his murder, not just his death, or commemorating his life. I agree, but that's what the oath and the pursuit of Morgoth is about, right? They're memorializing the murder of Finwë by swearing vengeance on his murderer, right? So we're good on that score.
Yeah. And so here's one thing. I'm not sure necessarily we need to use Fëanor and Fëanor's response to Finwë's death to establish standard practice or precedent for elves in general. Mm-hmm. But what it could do is establish precedent and standard practice for elves, or at least the Noldor in Middle-earth. And maybe the behavior and practices of the elves in Middle-earth is a departure from sort of what the kind of accepted practice in Valinor is. So maybe the standard practice in Valinor is something that looks more like what happened with Muriel. Of course, does anyone after the Noldor leave? Does anyone after they finish slaughtering their kin? Does anyone die ever again? Does there even need to be a standard practice?
That's true. After the kinslaying, there's going to be a whole lot of work demand on the maidens of Este, right? I mean, right.
But I think certainly there certainly needs to be some kind of standard practice for elves of Middle Earth, because they will be suffering and dying.
Right.
So maybe we don't have to make an overarching decision for elves in general, but we make a decision for elves, and specifically for the Noldor, who we already know to be kind of somewhat, set apart, like non-compliant. Maybe they have their own set of customs that the fact that those customs differ from kind of what the right thing to do or the standard thing to do for elves is, if it's different, that's okay, because we already know they're already doing lots of things differently. They're defying the Valar, they're slaughtering their kin, they're going to war, they're making weapons, that kind of stuff. Yeah. But definitely they have to do, like, it's on the one hand, it seems weird if you had like a fully constructed funeral rite in Valinor. Yes. On the other hand, it's going to seem really weird if they don't have one, and then over the next 10 seasons in Middle Earth, right? Like, it's going to be really weird.
No, clearly rituals will grow up. In fact, we have an opportunity for that, for thinking about that, after the crossing of the Helcaraxa.
Yes. I was just thinking that. What are they going to do with all the people that die along the way there?
Yeah, at the very least, they have to have some kind of ritual to commemorate the death. I don't know. We're gonna have to think about that a little bit more at that point. But and yes, we can have different funerary traditions among, like, to show the Teleri dealing with the bodies of their dead after the kinslaying. But Dave, you're so right. It's one of those things that you just, like, don't necessarily think about. I can't imagine that many elves in Valinor die from misadventure, right? I mean, just like somebody
household accident.
Exactly. Somebody fell off the 3rd-story balcony and broke his neck. Somebody got liquored up and tumbled down the stairs again. Like that kind of thing. I can't imagine that happens a whole lot. Like a tragic boating accident in the harbor and 2 people dismembered. I can't imagine that that's a major issue in Valinor, right? So you're right. I mean, I don't think I'd ever thought about that fact, but you're completely right. It seems totally plausible to imagine that the kinslaying represents like the entire corpse count. When we talk about how are elves buried in Valinor, the answer is they're not, right? The total corpse count in Valinor is the victims of the kinslaying plus Finwë, right? I mean, is there a reason to think it's more than that?
No.
So yeah, I there's not even we don't even need a Valinorian ritual, because there wouldn't be one. There would be a response to the kinslaying, right? And just as there's a response here to Finwë's death, but it wouldn't even be like, it's not even a precedent for anything, right? Because there wouldn't be any other instances, again, other than the major event of the kinslaying. Yeah. I mean, I guess it's conceivable, but yeah, I just really would not think that a lot of elves in Valinor would die of like traffic accidents and, eating bad shellfish or something like that, right? I mean, it's just, that can't be.
Yeah.
And I think that Feanor's issues, I agree with people who are saying that Feanor, like, this is an opportunity to show Feanor kind of unhinged, and that it's okay for his reaction to be kind of unelvish and abnormal because we were showing that he's unhinged. Oh, sure, I agree with that. But again, it's like, unhinged in what way? I think that Feanor's unhingedness shows itself in like monomaniacal, oaths of vengeance, essentially. Like, he is going to show how we would. My vote for Feanor's being imbalanced in the general sort of funerary arrangements of his father would be to show him raging at the Valar, basically. Like, I could see him walking up to the doors of Mandos and demanding to see his dad sooner than I could imagine him like building a monument in memorial of his father. Because he knows, like, his dad's right over there, right? He should be able to visit his, like, so yeah. So him going to Mandos and saying, what, aren't there any visiting hours around here? That's got to be right. That's got to be how crazy Feanor would handle it, right? It's got to be. Well, I think with Finwë, in particular, it's made easier by the fact that Muriel's body is still around, and we know where it is, right? It's in Lorien. So, in some sense, him being his body should be brought to Lorien, right? Even Feanor would want to bring his body to Lorien and lay it next to the body of his mother, wouldn't he? Isn't that what Feanor would want to do?
Yeah, you would think so. Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I mean, even and then we have, and I love the idea of Indus's final attempt to reach out to Feanor, and that would be the moment, right? And of course, Feanor is going to be unreceptive to Indus's advances of kindness. Yeah. Nick is saying that Fingolfin and Finarfin would probably not be enormously happy with that.
Hey, is there any chance, just tossing this out there, is there any chance that the elves of Middle-earth learn funeral rites from men? Or that their interactions with men, that they observe these. I mean, this seems weird because a lot of elves are going to die before men ever show up.
Right.
But when you start digging through the Silmarillion, kind of looking like I won't explain where I got this from, but I'm looking at an electronic version of the Silmarillion, and I'm kind of just skimming through and looking for identifying locations where I know people died and I recall them being buried in some way.
Right.
And a lot of them occur in stories that involving men. There's Finduilis, who gets buried during her. She's not buried by Turin, but she's buried by men. Where men have been around for a while. Finrod gets buried. But there doesn't seem to be. I guess I need to go and look and see what happens. Do they ever explain like I need to refresh what happens with Feanor? But it seems absurd.
His body collapses into dust.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So it seems absurd that the elves wouldn't have come up with something before men showed up, given the number of them that die. On the other hand, from the text, you really only start seeing the discussion of mounds and graves after men are part of the story.
Yeah.
Man, somebody should maybe someone's already done a paper like this for Mythmate. Somebody should do a paper on this.
Right. The funerary customs of Elves. Well, I think we have to think about this in the at the crossing of the Helcaraxa, right? I mean, we do talk about elf burials in Middle-earth. There's our first one, right?
Yep.
The burial / commemoration of those who died crossing the Helcaraxa. Phil points out that someone suggested earlier that burying the bodies was to protect them from being despoiled. Right. So that makes sense, even independent, I agree, of sort of mannish customs in that direction. Though I do like the idea. I mean, it is interesting to think, would the elves who interacted with men, would their ideas of what is the proper thing to do with the dead have been influenced in some way by human traditions?
Especially it's one thing to have kind of a societal set of rights, within say Nargothrond, but a lot of the instances where we see note where the elves getting buried or monuments are being erected
right.
are kind of one-off in the field things, where it's
Right.
sort of like, you know, like this guy died along our adventure and we don't really have time to haul him back to the whatever kingdom because we're on our way to do whatever.
Right.
And it's sort of that's a circumstance where like expediency, it sort of makes sense. Of course, again, you know, I say this as a person living as a human living in our world.
Right.
It makes sense that they would do something. It would seem weird and callous if they just were like, well, that guy's dead. Leave him there. Let's keep going.
Wait a second. You're right, though. Hang on a second. We do have a piece of testimony about this. Yes, we do. From Shagrat. Remember when Shagrat and Gorbag find the body of Frodo sitting in the pass, Shagrat calls that, quote, a regular elvish trick, unquote.
Huh.
Yes, he does. Because one of them says like the other one, the elvish warrior that's loose, didn't seem to have thought much of him, right? Just left him lying. Regular elvish trick. Now, of course, Shagrat might be wrong, but that's really interesting, isn't it? Oh man, yeah.
Good point.
Oh, regular elvish trick. Is it a regular elvish trick? Is Shagrat right about that? Oh my god, yeah, just to leave the wrapped body lying there. Oh man, yeah. Wow.
Someone really needs to do a moot paper. Because I feel like this is a really interesting topic because I feel like there's conflicting textual evidence.
Right. And Phil, Phil supplies.
In fact, there's your title for the myth moot paper. Something about a regular elvish trick.
Right. A regular elvish trick, yeah,
a regular elvish trick, elvish funeral rites in the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings.
yeah.
Someone write that.
Someone write that, exactly, yeah. Now, Phil Boswell, of course, reminds us that the orcs are not objecting to the fact that they didn't bury their comrade fitly, as Aragorn would say, but rather that they didn't eat him. Which is what the orcs would obviously do with their companions. Yes. The regular elvish trick from Shagrat's perspective might be just leaving perfectly good meat lying around and not eating it. Yeah.
By the way, so another one I've dug up. So Turgon definitely builds a high cairn over his father.
Yes.
In Gondolin.
Yes. Yes. In the mountains. Right. So, exactly.
Sort of indisputable now that it's sort of indisputable that elves were definitely doing this. I think before they ever really interacted with men. Right.
Yes. Yeah. You can't imagine Turgon being highly influenced by human funerary traditions. Right. Yeah. Okay. All right. Boy, so talking about the plot of the first episode, and we've gotten sidetracked onto 3 totally vague, general, non-plot oriented questions. Sorry, I'm so excited about remembering the Shagrat quote that I can barely think about anything else now. Let's not worry about settling all of this for all time. But I'm really glad we had this discussion because that was super fun. But let's think in terms of this episode. Clearly, Feanor is going to do something with his father's body. Howsoever regular an elvish trick it might be to leave the dead lying about, Feanor's obviously not going to just leave his father's body rotting in Formenos where it fell, right? So that's not going to happen. Nor do I think the elves would do that anyway under normal circumstances, leave the corpse lying around the house. That's obviously not going to happen. He would bear it. I like the idea of him bearing it to Lorien, right, and laying it next to Muriel's corpse. Now, somebody was saying, wouldn't that be a little bit weird to have his corpse lying there rotting next to Muriel's undecaying body? Of course, I'm tempted to say, well, I guess the handmaidens of Este get to earn their overtime, in that circumstance. But no, I don't mean that he necessarily has to leave the corpse to decay in the open air. Though what actually happens to it, we can leave it sitting there, his body lying next to Muriel's, and that can be the last visual image we get of it. We don't have to actually show them disposing of the body eventually, ultimately. He could his body could be lying there covered in a sheet next to Muriel's body. And then we have, Feanor and Indis and Fingolfin and Finarfin there, at the site, right? There with the two bodies. And they can, would all of the elves show up? Would there be a ceremony? Would there be a gathering? I'm not sure there would necessarily be a gathering. I could see it just kind of being a family thing. But I certainly don't think we necessarily need to have a general conclave here. In fact, I think we shouldn't have a general conclave because we want to save the general conclave for later on when Feanor summons them all for his speech. If we have a general funeral and then the speech, I would not want the speech to happen at the funeral, certainly. And if we don't have it at the funeral, especially if the funeral's over in Lorien, if we don't have it happen at the funeral, then we have to have this whole throng of the Noldor following Feanor around all day long, and that just seems silly. So I say we have Feanor brings his father's body back to Lorien. Right, and Finarfin and Fingolfin and Indis show up. Maybe they even show up late because Feanor didn't even invite them or something. But they having heard that he's going, maybe Nerdinel can tip them off and they show that he's taking his father's body, and they show up and they sort of encounter him there. But it's not really a funeral. Right, because there wouldn't be a custom. There wouldn't be let's all gather around and show our respects to the body of the dead. That's not something that they would do. So it's just he's bringing his father's body to rest next to his mother, and they show up. Indis and her sons show up and have a moment with Feanor over the bodies of Muriel and Finwë. That I think would work dramatically and gives us an opportunity. Maybe Nerdinel is there as well. Maybe she shows up with them. That gives us a moment to have some family, to hash out some family dynamics in private prior to to set up some of the things that are going to be happening at the big talk later on. Zach asks, would Feanor's sons be present? Great question. I say no, because if we bring in Feanor's sons, then we'll end up getting everybody. I mean, we'll have to bring in all would we then bring in Fingolfin and nah. I'd say just the second generation elves. So just Indis. The scene can just be between Indis, Feanor, Fingolfin, and Finarfin, and possibly Nerdinel. That's what I would think in that scene.
Yes, keep it a small, intimate character moment.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Good. All right. Well, we're just trucking through our slides here, so that's great. So I asked questions about Nerdinel here, and is she going to speak against Feanor at the big debate? And their answer was no. The consensus: she will not speak during the public debate, but her body language will make her disagreement quite clear. Also, she could potentially leave when the oath happens. I kind of like that. The one thing I don't like about that is to have Nerdinel never say anything again and walk off stage and we never hear from her ever again would be hard, given it would be a dramatic exit, right? For her just to be standing there and for her to be kind of walking out. Yeah. Here's what I'm struggling with. What I'm struggling with is, what does it mean? What her rejection of Feanor, what role does it play? not politically, because she doesn't have to. It's okay for her not to have a political role. She doesn't have to be one of the spokespersons to represent a point of view of the Noldor as a whole. It's okay if she doesn't do that. But the estrangement from Nerdanel has to be a crucial moment in Feanor's character development, right? And so we have to think about that moment and the significance of that moment. When Nerdanel walks out, here's how I'm picturing that. I'm picturing she doesn't have to have dialogue. She doesn't have to speak publicly. But there needs to be, I would think, there needs to be this sort of final battle of wills between Nerdanel and Feanor, where she is trying to... the transaction would be her communicating to Feanor, you know this is crazy, right? You know you have gone completely off the rails, right? You know that you are leading yourself, our family, and our people into hopeless destruction, right? You understand how crazy this is. And him basically defying that and being like, no, I'm not crazy. You don't understand. I'm not saying any of this stuff has to happen in words. But that transaction needs to happen. Her role has been to counterbalance him. Her role has been the only one whose counsel he would take or really listen to. It would be kind of interesting to have that happen non-verbally, but it has to happen. Like, we can't just have her like walking off and nobody notices, right? I mean, that moment when they are estranged forever, this is closing down. This is the end of a plot line that, you know, was a significant thread, you know, their relationship through season 2. And, you know, one of the things that we were talking about with Feanor's development last season was sort of the point of no return, right? You know, when is the point of no return? Where does he, you know, where does the fall occur? You know, where and we were emphasizing the significance, of course, of drawing his sword on his brother. That was a big deal. You know, that was a major turning point. His choice not to give up the Silmarils to restore the trees is a major moment. His estrangement from his wife is associated. His decision to leave Valinor and to break his banishment is a huge deal, right? He shows up in Tirion so he has never yet openly defied the Valar. He's never openly disobeyed the Valar before. They banished him, he went. They summoned him back for the feast, and he came. He's never yet openly defied them. When he returns to Tirion to deliver his speech, he's crossed the Rubicon with the Valar, right? And it seems to me that the relationship with we need to be picking up on that. And I think that the relationship with Nerdanel can be a vehicle for making that happen. You know, maybe we have a conversation with them beforehand. Maybe she tries to maybe he shows up at Tirion and she like before he starts his speech. We have a confrontation, the final confrontation between the two, where she tries to stop him from going. Where she is telling him, like, dude, you are banished. You cannot do this. So that we are really emphasizing when he walks into that city and starts making his speech, it's not the speech. You know, the oath, of course, is a major point of no return, but in a sense, he's already made that choice, right? The oath is more like the outward, you know, sort of finalizing of the deal.
The oath is like the public performance of the decision that he's already made.
Exactly.
The decision to return.
Exactly.
As you say, that's the internal. That's when he made the decision.
Exactly. So, I mean, it's not to say that the oath isn't a big deal. I'm not trying to minimize the oath in any way, but yeah, public performance of the internal choice he's already made. That's exactly what I was thinking, Dave. And if we show the moment of choice, right, or the moment when he, you know, sort of openly not in public in front of everybody, but even just in private, when he says it, like when he makes it clear that he has made, what choice it is that he has made. I think that we have that confrontation with Nerdanel in advance where she tries to stop him from going in. I like that. Interesting. Hakan says that her words to him in that debate should be like the personal version of the doom of Mandos. I like that concept. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Nick says the oath seems very premeditated. Exactly. He's already thought of the oath, right? He's planning to do it. It's not been done yet, and so that's a big deal. But yeah. Tony says that he thinks that that Feanor should see Nerdanel's disagreement as a betrayal, that she is taking the side of the Valar against him.
Yes,
and
that seems very likely.
That seems very likely. And this also causes him to distrust the rest of the Noldor even more, making it easier for him to burn the ships and abandon Fingolfin's folk later on. I agree, Tony, we do need to be thinking about sort of planting the seeds, not only for the oath and the kinslaying, but for the abandonment of Fingolfin as well. Yeah. Karita wants her to echo something she's already said, or maybe that he said to her early in their relationship. Yeah, that'd be really cool. This is the end. This is the end of their relationship right here. So absolutely, we need to be we would need, in writing the script, we would need to be tying this together with conversations they have had before. Absolutely. Marielle thinks that it should shock Feanor and his sons, that they should be angry at her for the stand that she is taking, for breaking ranks with them, for siding with the Valar against them, for making herself their enemy. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So if we have that debate first, and then he crosses the line and he goes into the city and he makes his speech. Now she doesn't need to say anything, right? She just stands there disapprovingly. Perhaps she could walk out at a dramatic point, not to make it look like she's stomping off in a huff, but, at a point in the debate. No, I don't like her leaving because that I don't want her to walk out. The reason I don't want her to walk out is there are going to be some who are speaking against Feanor, and Feanor who is trying to persuade everyone. And if she walks out, that seems to be her just kind of abdicating a decision, not standing against him, right? To walk out is not to stand with his opponents as well, right? So I would rather have her remain silent. And if she walks out, I think that would, in the end, probably seem weak.
Makes sense.
Ooh, Tony asks the question: does she actually go to the Valar? That would be really interesting. Yeah. I don't know. I have to think about that. Okay. Okay. Yep. Good. All right. I'm happy with Nerdanel. So I was asking about people to speak at the debate. And so this, I think, was also a follow-up from the question about Nerdanel. Are we going to get, female voices at the debate? And the reminder of the two other females that we have, one of whom, of course, is there, and was one of my questions. What are we going to do with Galadriel? And the sentiment was for Galadriel to be anti-Feanor, but pro-Middle-earth. In general, I agree. Of all the different Galadriels that Tolkien considered, I like the one in the published Silmarillion. I like the one who is for whom the arrival in Middle-earth is also a kind of fall. I like the flawed Galadriel, not the like perfect, awesome hero anti-Fëanor going with pure motivations to try to save all the rest of the elves. I would rather have her giving into temptation here. Following Fëanor with the idea of her being anti-Fëanor, right? Her responding against Fëanor and thinking that he is insane and being opposed to him, but yet she wants to go to Middle-earth, right? So that's really interesting. I love this point that she can serve as a voice for Finarfin's people who wind up going. Finarfin, of course, is going to remain, and many of his people will also turn back and end up staying in Valinor, but not all of them will. Some of them will go. Now, of course, his sons are also going to be going, of course, most notably, but it would be really interesting if a bunch of people are following Galadriel's lead. The line that just popped into my head is from Boromir, right? Saruman was a traitor, but did he not have some wisdom, right? When he argues for taking the ring and using it, right? I can see Galadriel taking that exact kind of tack in this conversation, right? Fëanor is a madman and a traitor, but he has some wisdom, right? We are kind of cooped in a narrow place here, right? It would be good to go. I think Phil is asking a question about Galadriel's name. Of course, she does have several names. I think we just call her Galadriel. I don't think we mess around with that right now. We have enough people with enough names. And if we have somebody whose name changes, it has to be at a really significant moment, right? Like the change from Melkor to Morgoth that we are undertaking in this season. So the other one is Irame, who wants revenge against Melkor for the death of her father, Finwë. Irame, of course, is the sister, not mentioned in the Silmarillion. She does not care about the Silmarils. Prior to this, she was always the closest to her brother Fingolfin and was not a fan of Fëanor. So basically, we have Irame. So the sort of division, and Marielle was suggesting this. We have sort of these three women representing three different reactions. Nerdanel not approving of the whole thing, Galadriel not approving of Fëanor and his vengeance kick, but wanting to go to Middle-earth, Irame not caring about Middle-earth, but wanting vengeance against Morgoth. I kind of like that. Tony suggests a line from Galadriel, something along the lines of, "We will come with you, but we will not follow you." Yes, that's a major issue. Lots of people are going to be in that camp. Galadriel would speak for many in saying, "We will come with you, but we will not follow you," because most of them want to follow Fingolfin. Instead, remember, Fingolfin has been their leader for years now, while Fëanor has been in Formenos. That's good. That's good. So, all right, let's keep going. Other voices. Finarfin. We know that Finarfin is don't be hasty is his message, right? His we are told what he says at the debate, and that is that they should stop and think, right? Let's not do anything that we will regret without thinking it carefully through first. This is Finarfin's tack. So, in other words, Finarfin's role in the debate is not to be like, this is wrong, we shouldn't do this, but rather, let's not rush off. Let's not be hasty. Fingolfin is the one that I think, this is the thing that could be really interesting. I think that Fingolfin...
Yeah, he should be super conflicted.
Super conflicted, because he's the one who believes this is wrong. We shouldn't do this.
Yeah.
Finarfin isn't the one saying this is wrong. Fingolfin is the one saying this is wrong, and yet he's promised to follow where Feanor leads.
Right.
Feanor can taunt him with that, I would think. You know, little brother, you said, where I lead, you will follow.
Yeah.
You know, are you going to be a liar as well as a coward?
Yeah, that's a good idea. Like, that should be, Fingolfin should have a brief moment of trying to find some way to communicate to his brother that this is a bad idea and we shouldn't do this, and Feanor should rebuke him.
Yes.
And then what we should see is that Fingolfin knows he's boxed in.
Yes.
That he does not want to admit to being what Feanor has accused him, and so he feels that he has no choice but to go along with this.
And he is also determined to continue being a leader to the people who are going. And of course, many of them, like, you know, the Galadriel camp, all make it clear that they want to return to Middle-earth. You know, this is they agree with Feanor that the life in Valinor isn't necessarily all that, and that they want to return, but they're not comfortable following Feanor. That basically, if Fingolfin doesn't come with them, Fingolfin would be just like abandoning them to Feanor, and he should feel that fairly keenly, right?
Yeah. And that can maybe be I don't know who. I mean, is Fingolfin mostly just surrounded by people who are gung-ho about going, or is he going to have a few people in his entourage that when he announces we're going, and he's going, that is he going to have people around him who say, dude, what are you doing? This is crazy. Assuming that he has people like that around him, I think his explanation or justification will be along these lines. It will be, I have to go because I have to watch out for our people and that sort of thing. Right. Like, I think he'll focus on that as his justification, as his rationalization for going.
Yes.
And kind of ignore or skate over the fact that he's doing it just because he wants to prove something to Feanor.
Yes. I think that there should be a voice that says, perhaps in private, perhaps in public, to Fingolfin, like of Fingolfin's followers, somebody saying, you know, this is a bad idea. I think it should be Turgon. The reason I say that, his second son Turgon, we know that Fingon is not a candidate for this because Fingon and Maedhros are tight, right? So Fingon is going to want to go. If anything, Fingon is going to want to try to save his friend, like morally, spiritually save his friend whom he's just heard take this terrible oath, right? So Fingon is going to be really alarmed, and he's going to want to go along to try to help and, you know, redeem Maedhros. And of course, the fact that he ends up physically saving him, we can again be sowing the seeds for that, right? So his desire to save Maedhros is going to be a strong motivation for him to accompany them. So Fingolfin's eldest son, for his own reasons, very much wants to go. Turgon, however, Turgon eventually is going to be setting up his own little the guy who's going to set himself up in Gondolin and refuse to allow anyone ever to leave for like the rest of time can't be somebody who has that's not the personality profile of somebody who objects to being hemmed in a narrow place, right? Somebody for whom Valinor didn't offer a wide enough scope for his talents, and he needed to spread out in Middle-earth. Turgon doesn't seem to be a spread out kind of guy, right? And what he sets up in Gondolin is also the most sort of Valinor-centric of all of the Elvish kingdoms, even to the fact that he builds he constructs his little replica trees in it, right? Turgon loves Tyrion, Marie, exactly, and I think he of all of Fingolfin's sons is the most Valinor oriented. He's still going to go. He's going to go with his father and his brothers, but I think he's the one who wants to less. So I think if it wants to least. So if we need a voice of opposition within Fingolfin's family, I think Turgon is clearly the one. And of course, you notice how it makes it then double tragic that he's the one who least wants to go, and he's the one whose wife dies in the crossing of the Helcaraxa. So, yeah. And Tony, yes, Eredhel should also immediately choose to go, since she is close to the sons of Feanor, and I would think that Eredhel also. We know that she has an issue with being hemmed in a narrow place, right? So she should be in the Galadriel camp, basically. Yeah. Marielle was just thinking the same thing. Do we give Eredhel a voice here? I think that we can, or even if she doesn't speak, I mean, there are only so many characters that we can have speak, or it's going to be super confusing who's who and what's going on. But we can at least have Eredhel clearly agreeing with and standing with. I think Galadriel is the clearest indicator there. But yeah, Hakan suggests that Turgon isn't going to argue, but he would put in a word of caution. Yes, exactly. I don't think that he, defies his father. I think that he would submit to Fingolfin, but he would put in a word of caution and possibly say something in private to his father afterwards. Finrod. Finrod, soon to be Felagund, stands with his father. His father is Finarfin, but I don't think he wants to go. Finarfin wants to go. The one who stands most closely with Finarfin is Orodreth. The text says that Orodreth spoke like his father, the voice of reason, let's not be hasty, let's stop and think this through a little bit more before we do anything rash. That's Orodreth's line as well as Finarfin's. Finrod is keen. The rest of the sons of Finarfin are keen. But again, they're not going to totally break with their father either. So, hey, Marie, let's have Finrod. Let's establish. We could use this as a moment to establish Finrod and Turgon's friendship, right? So Finrod and Turgon both urge caution, right? Again, not speaking exactly like Finarfin, but offer caution to Fingolfin and the other followers. But we can see that Finrod rather is interested. I mean, he does want to go. Okay. I don't think the sons of Feanor say much. I can't imagine they do. I mean, they're going to be just mostly deferring to their dad. I think the sons of Feanor's role is basically to kind of, the seven of them stand shoulder to shoulder and kind of be a united front with their dad. Maybe Maedhros. Maybe we have Maedhros look uncomfortable. I mean, I could imagine him speaking the oath and then meeting Fingon's eyes and looking away to give some indicator that he has misgivings about his father's actions here, but he's not going to break ranks, and he's certainly not going to speak out against him. So yeah, Marielle, if we want any private hesitation on the part of the sons of Feanor, I think it's got to be with Maedhros and possibly with Magor, setting up, of course, the discussion between them at the very, very end when they're with their debate of whether they try to get the Silmarils.
You don't think Curufin and Curanir would be the guys who would be like, gee, Dad, this seems rash.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Curufin is all about that. Yeah,
he's always been the voice of reason.
Yeah.
Also, how old are these guys at this point anyway?
Oh, they're all full grown because we've got their children around already.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if I hope we have a really disturbing shot of a small child, shouting, issuing a blood-curdling yell, hoisting a sword, shouting how we need to head to Middle Earth and conquer lands.
No, I don't think we're going to do that. Ooh, yeah. Hakan wants a Gildor Inglorian cameo here. Yeah. Well, he's of the House of Finrod. He's an exile, so yeah, he'd have been there, standing with Finrod. So yeah, we just have to. One of the guys that we have standing with Finrod has to be cast as Gildor later on. So there we go. Mario asks, "What is Celebrimbor doing?" They do.
He's the kid with the sword.
He's the kid with the sword, kid brandishing the sword. No, but he'd be
Yes.
brandishing like a hammer and a set of tongs or something.
Toolbox.
Yeah, a toolbox. Brandishing a toolbox. Yeah.
Shouting about the rich mineral deposits in Middle Earth.
Exactly. Right. Now, of course, and as Mary reminds, he doesn't take the oath, right? Only the sons of Fëanor take the oath. Yeah.
He's one of the people standing there shouting, "Yeah, that sounds great. You guys do that."
Yeah.
I love the idea of people. I love the idea of there being a bunch of enablers around, supporting Fëanor, egging them on, saying, "Yes, let's go to Middle Earth." But then, I'm not making this oath.
Yeah, it's funny because we don't get anybody. I mean, notice that we have friends and supporters named of many of the other elf lords, right? Like the people in Doriath, right? With Mablung and Beleg and Celeborn and Dairon, right? We have folks like Glorfindel and Gildor and Glorian and Ecthelion. Glorfindel, as Hakan points out, should also be there, of course. But with Fëanor, it's just his kids, right? His kids and his grandkids. There are other Fëanorians, but they're never named. We never get any other elves, any of their captains or friends. Interesting. Anyway, okay. I don't think that we need other random Noldor. Mostly just because I think we have enough folks, and we want to focus the action on people who we're going to see again, right? I mean, we're leaving Mahtan and Rumil behind forever here in Valinor, so I think that they don't need to speak. But again, folks like Glorfindel and Ecthelion, we're going to hear more from them later on, right? So meeting them would be cool.
Well, this sounds good.
Okay. All right.
Although I think an Easter egg moment for Rumil would be important.
Right. That would be good. Every
once in a while, we got to throw a bone to the super fans.
Yeah, exactly. And Marielle, I think that's exactly right. She points out this isn't a democracy. Only the lords, that is, only like the royal family speak. And I love the comparison. She says it's like in the Iliad, right, when only like the kings and captains speak in the debates. No, exactly. I don't think we need to have, certainly, like, Glorfindel, Gildor and Glorian, they're not gonna speak in the debate. Yeah.
So Fëanor's not hosting a town hall meeting here?
No, this is not a town hall meeting. No.
To get the pulse of his constituency?
Yeah. No, he's trying to dictate the pulse of his constituency.
Right.
Keep in mind, however, that we can't forget that this is one of the high points of Fëanor's entire career. Like in the list of accomplishments of, like, when Fëanor makes up his resume afterwards, of like things I accomplished during my life, this is one of the big deals, right? Not just because
rebellion against
successfully convinced the Noldor to rebel against the Valar. Like, it's not a great thing to boast of, but it was a mighty accomplishment. Like the power of his speech, the power of his words in being able to sway and convince everyone around him. We have to make sure to avoid having it look like everybody. It would be easy if we're not careful, I think, to have like the Fingolfin and Finarfin crowd. Because if you think about all those characters that we just listed who are all saying things, notice nobody is speaking totally on Fëanor's side. Right? We have one person. We have all this long list of people some are in favor of this thing and some are in favor of that thing, and many of them have reservations. The total number of people we just listed who have reservations and speak against the plan to rebel and leave far outnumbered. The only one we have in the other camp is like Fëanor. That's it. Like it's him against like the wisdom of everybody else, and he wins. Like he's got to win that debate, and he's not going to win it logically, right? I mean, he's not going to argue everybody else into submission and everybody be like, at the end of the day, I think that this is really the best idea. Clearly, they have to just be moved and stirred by his, and that's going to be tricky. It's going to be a real challenge to depict.
Right.
Them getting swept away by his charisma.
Looking at the slide and some of the questions posed, I think there are actually pretty obvious answers to most of these. Is the oath spontaneous or pre-planned? I think it should, on screen, we should not have like a scene where he's talking to his son saying, okay, so I'm going to make this speech, we're going to take it out. Like, I think
I've written out a copy for each of you so you can memorize it. Yeah.
I think to the audience, it should appear in the moment should appear spontaneous, because that will be way more dramatic. But it should be heavily implied that it was pre-planned based on the conversations leading up to it. That it should be based on Fëanor, the kind of the discussion and the some of the debates, things with Nerdnell and stuff should make it very clear that this is where his mind was,
right,
and that the oath is just the culmination.
Right.
I think visually it's going to be way more impressive if Fëanor, especially as this note mentions, I think Fëanor should just say the oath, and then maybe his sons agree to it or something. But I don't think it's necessary that the sons make it at this moment, since I think it's way more dramatic if Fëanor delivers this speech on screen alone, and what we see is that it washes over the crowds like a tide and changes everyone's minds.
Right.
And then later, after he dies, that's when his sons will do a recall. They will then recapitulate the oath themselves, and then that will be a dramatic moment pointing back to this one. I think that's way cooler than just having the sons say it with him now and have them say it again.
That is interesting. I was briefly imagining a scene in which he actually like dictates the oath, and his sons repeat it after him line by line, which could work really well dramatically as the oath gets more and more alarming all the way down. Like it starts off sounding fairly standard, and then with each new clause it's like more alarming, and like I can't believe that, and like people's eyes widening as the oath goes on. I think that could unroll in some really interesting ways, but I like your idea, and I agree with what Chris Graham was just saying. The original oath is passionate and spontaneous from Fëanor's lips. It certainly feels that way, right? Yeah.
But imagine sort of the drama of, so Fëanor makes this speech and this oath, and it can maybe be implied that other people take it afterward, but that isn't necessarily shown on screen. Imagine sort of the drama of that, and then seeing the aftermath of what people think of it and how bad it was. And then a couple episodes later, his sons, upon his death, take it upon themselves to now make the oath themselves.
Right.
Sort of because what that suggests, that there could be sort of a moment of potential relief for the audience where they're like, Fëanor's dead, maybe things can go back to normal,
right?
And people can be normal again, and maybe his sons will pull back, and then his sons make the oath, and you're like, nope, never mind, it's just getting worse.
Well, and especially since we're setting up for that, right? Because at the burning of the ships, Maedhros stands aside, so it looks like the second generation, they're not unified in this, right? Maybe Maedhros is going to be the one who brings the family of Fëanor back into the fold, right? And atones for what they've done, and then he takes the oath, right?
Yeah. I think having the sons not take the oath on screen until later, it elevates them in terms of as sort of antagonists, in the sense that instead of them kind of being, taking the oath now and then later on they're bound by it. When Fëanor dies, they have to keep going.
Right.
Rather, what we show an intentional, like them intentionally taking upon themselves to continue his mission.
Right.
That sort of elevates them as, not just Fëanor's flunky sons, but actually, kind of like sort of like Fëanor reborn again. That they're given an opportunity to repent and draw back, and instead they double down.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Though, of course, you add in the extra factor. They do it while Feanor is still alive, while he's dying.
Yes.
Right. And
Yeah,
so you still have the element of compulsion there, right? Mithros does it
Yes.
not because he's totally gung-ho about the oath, but because his father lays it upon him to like take or to renew the oath at that moment.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah, perfect.
So we can see
Yeah,
him
right
being
before he
trapped
dies.
and feeling trapped, right?
Yeah, so, yeah, that's perfect. I like that because that adds additional tragedy.
Yes. Yeah. So it's still their choice, but it's but it's still it gives that sort of tragic
Yeah.
element to it.
Perfect.
Yeah, I like that. We could even imply that maybe they took it also. We could even allude to the fact that others took the oath with Feanor after he uttered it, at the time. But we could lay the dramatic stress upon that moment when they renew the oath, so we don't see them speaking it on screen until that moment at Feanor's death. Yeah. I like that. Cool. Good.
I think that's super dramatic.
Yeah, that's nice. I like it. Okay. All right, so yeah, we talked about the reciting of the oath. Let's see. Do we plan to have most of the discussion about leaving Valinor happen during or after Feanor's speech, or do we want to start that debate through scenes between the characters beforehand? No, I think it needs to be an idea that's really okay. The idea was planted by Melkor already. It's part of the unrest that the Noldor have been experiencing, but I don't think we can't undermine the way in which Feanor's speech and Feanor's charisma sweeps them away, right? So if we have a bunch of people already being like, I don't know, do you want to blow this joint or what? I've been kind of thinking about it, and then Feanor gives it. Then I think that really decreases the effect of that. That should clearly be his speech should be seen to be the catalyst.
The one thing I would say about that is, if there are discussions, one way to make the speech more dramatic is to demonstrate or show a certain amount of pre-existing resistance to the idea.
Right.
So if we can plant some preview debates where certain people that I think we've already decided, like, these people will definitely be on his side, kind of start broaching the idea and kind of taking the taking the temperature of everyone else. And what it becomes clear is, as you said, the majority of people at best case scenario, like the majority of people have at a minimum reservations or
Yes.
concerns or want to be cautious, and there's some people that outright oppose him.
Yes.
And then what we show is those same people after the speech have been won over. So that's one thing we could do if we can plant some discussion or debate early on. We can clearly show that people are not on Feanor's side to start with, and then they are won over by the speech.
Yes, I like this idea, and I have an idea for how we can do that. We need to have a Fingolfin and his people scene prior to this, because we have to address the question of the kingship. Fingolfin's been ruling in Tirion. Feanor is still banished. Right? He's been brought back for the festival, but he wasn't unbanished. He's still exiled. So now that Finwë is dead, it makes a lot of sense that somebody, his sons and him, maybe Finarfin should probably be there. We'll have this conversation with Fingolfin saying, "What happens now? Who's in charge? You or Feanor?"
Perfect. Yeah. So we don't have to rehearse the debate about whether to go to Middle Earth.
Right.
But what we can have is Finwë's dead and Feanor's returning to Tirion. He's been summoned. What's going to happen? Are they going to are they going to give the kingship back to him? No, we don't want that. We support you. Yeah, that's right. We can demonstrate that there is resistance to Feanor as an individual in general, without actually telegraphing where things are really going.
Yeah, and I like that. You're right. If we don't bring up the whole issue of returning, if the return to Middle Earth doesn't even seem to be on the table, right? But that's what comes in Feanor's, and it's clear through people like Galadriel, right? We can show how this idea of returning to Middle Earth and establishing a realm for yourself, and the wide expanse of Middle Earth that has been kept from us by the Valar, That idea is the one that really, like the two things that he's offering them, right? The two things that he is convincing them of is A, wouldn't it be awesome to return to Middle Earth? And B, don't you want to get vengeance against Morgoth? And different people will be swayed to different extents by those two sides, right? But those are the two things that are going to be the moving. So again, that I think helps us to explain. If we show people, at least the leaders in Fingolfin's sort of inner circle, right, being resistant to Feanor personally, but yet even some of those, such as Fingon and Galadriel and even Finrod, they're swayed. They're very attracted by what Feanor is offering, even though they're resistant to him himself. So that way we can show them not just reversing themselves, and yet we show them being sort of swept away. Yeah, exactly, Tony. Because they're immortal, they don't have a clear succession plan worked out. Absolutely. So it would be a big open question. Who really is the leader now? There's not an heir apparent. There's no convention for that. So it would just be an open question, and I think that's what we see later on too. By the way, right? That's why Fingon's brother instead of his son becomes High King after Fingon dies, because there's not a clear inheritance tradition among the elves. Because why would immortals establish a clear inheritance tradition? Yeah, okay, cool, good.
It's hard to believe that the elves didn't. It's hard to believe that the elves haven't established their, dynastic policies
right.
and how to peaceably transfer power.
Right, when no one's ever died. Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah.
These guys don't plan ahead. They have no funeral rites. No plan for transferring power.
Sloppy. The last question touches on, of course, that other big subject we've already discussed. What are the Valar up to? The idea that I tossed out quite spontaneously in the midst of our earlier discussion, I like more and more the more I think about it. Namely, let's open episode 2 with that. Let's open episode 2 with the discussion of the Valar. What are they going to do in response to Feanor's breaking his banishment and then the decision of the Noldor to leave? I think that's a good transition rather, to kind of recap what happened in the previous episode and move forward into the next one. There's a lot of potential for some sort of cool dramatic moments there. And I don't want to coming at the end of this episode, or it would have to come at the end, right? Because they'd have to be reacting to what Feanor did. But I mean, what an anticlimactic way to end this episode, right? With like going to the Valar and having them talk about, have them break down the debate. That can't be.
I'm not sure that's necessary, but what we can show is we can just do a reaction shot where we just show them feeling like we could show like Bardo with a tear in her eye. Yeah. I love Nick's idea. Let's like during the speech, like maybe during the oath, right? We cut to Manwë and Varda sitting on their thrones, seeing and hearing what Feanor is doing, right? And responding to it, but they don't. That's all we see. So we know that they're aware of it, but we don't get any discussion yet. They have a live stream of it on a large flat panel display.
Exactly, they're live streaming the Oath of Feanor in the Ring of Doom. Yeah. The Valar are all gathered around. The Maiar can probably get it on pay-per-view. That's totally what happens. But no, I like having them sitting on the seats of seeing and hearing, basically up on Taniquetil and looking down upon Feanor would be cool. It would also give us some really fun opportunities to have. I guess it's right after Valinor is darkened, so we wouldn't have enough light to do this. It would be a shame, because we could have showing, after we show Manwë and Varda looking down on them from their seats upon Taniquetil, having Taniquetil in the background of the discussion and debate would become interesting. but of course it'd be too dark to see a mountain in the distance, obviously. Yeah. Mario points out that Varda is there. We can have as much light as we want. Right, no, but I mean atmospheric light. Like you're not going to have light to illuminate a mountain in the distance. You could, of course, Mario, we could have a light atop Tiniquitil, right? Where Varda is, there could be light. So you could perhaps see the shining light of Varda in the background, right, up on the mountain. That could be kind of cool. But, okay, good. All right. Well, this comes to the end of our time, so questions for next time. I think we did a lot of good work today. Questions for next time. So see episode 2, we got the kinslaying, right? So my questions: how does the crisis at the harbor fit in with the story we developed for Olwe? We had talked about killing off Olwe in the next episode. We need to remember and to be reminding our viewers who have not seen Olwe in quite some time, we need to be reminding them of the story of Olwe. Remember Olwe's calling and his decision to go over the seas, and this idea that we had of him having some significant role to play, which is perhaps going to be thwarted by his death, right? So we got to work that somehow. We have to make sure that Olwe is not just a high-profile red shirt in the if we're going to kill him off, it needs to really mean something in the kinslaying. Who does what during the battle? How involved are our main characters? How do we want to handle this? I mean, I don't think we necessarily need to have a big like tactical developments in the battle, but
it does, like, who do we want to show doing what?
Exactly.
Who's on screen running around murdering people?
Yes. Who's like we kind of need to choose which of our main characters do we want to show spattered in gore, right? I mean, who literally has blood on his hands? That's a question, right? I mean, it becomes a debate later on. Remember the sons of Finarfin saying to Thingol, we came not, red-handed from the slaying of our kin.
Yeah.
But who does?
Who's involved? Who's maybe in? Like you want to show a distinction between sort of a Curufin running around cutting down people who are fleeing, versus other like Galadriel, like kind of in the thick of things and encountering resistance and understandably fighting back to defend her life and killing people, but reluctantly, right. Yeah, because this is really where we set up sort of. This is a good opportunity to set up who has what standing in this crowd. Who are the instigators?
Yes.
And the real criminals, and which people are kind of guilty by association, and which people were in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah, not to mention the fact that this who does what here, what role which of these people has a huge impact. Will have a huge impact on their relationships with each other, right? Yeah. Because, though the Sons of Fëanor are going to remember which of the other people stood back and did nothing or even fought on the other side. Remember, some of them are going to come in and fight against the Fëanorians, right? That's not going to be quickly forgotten, so who should we have do that? Nope. And again, who stands back and does nothing? And what exactly do they do? I mean, does Galadriel have blood on her hands? Probably not. Does Fingon have blood on his hands? And how does that connect with his saving of Maedhros later on? Is he trying to atone for his own sins as well? This also will impact the receptions people receive from the Sindar. Yeah, exactly.
We can't show anyone on screen murdering hapless Teleri and then later show them in the court of Thingol.
Right, being buddies. Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, we've got to be careful about that. So we need to be thinking through who does what. Not to mention the personal significance, right? I mean, the images, the visual images. We've got when we show Galadriel, we've got to be thoughtful about this, right? Galadriel is going to be flashing back to this moment, right, for millennia after this, and it gives us an opportunity to be recalling these things. The individual decisions made by particular people during this battle have to be things that are going to come up for them later on, in decisions that come up later on in their lives. So we need to think. We can't think in just broad terms, like the Fëanorians did this, and some of the people of Fingolf and the people of Fëanor stood back, or the people of Finarfin stood back and didn't, and got there late. we can't think in the kinds of general terms that the book gives us there. We need to be coming down much more close. And I'm much more interested in that. I think that the battle itself should be focused not on like the tactical ebb and flow of the combat, but should be focused entirely upon the actions of individuals, basically, because those are what's going to really what is going to really matter later on. So, okay, and then how do we handle the reactions and non-intervention of the Valar? We've got to think that through. And so I think that maybe we go beginning and ending of the episode. We start and finish with the Valar, perhaps. But we'll think about that next time. But we've got to do the Valar Council. So what would you want to have the Valar say? Do we have a small Valar scene? Like maybe just a conversation between Varda, Mandos, and Manwë, for instance? Or do we have the full Ring of Doom thing happening and debate and Tulkas getting to say fun Tulkas things and Olmo having an opinion? What do we do? Do we do that or not? And if so, who says, who's gonna take what part? So those are the questions. Lots of things to be thinking about. This next episode 2, the kinslaying. I mean, it's hard to underestimate what a huge deal the kinslaying is. This may be one of the single biggest, most important scenes we've ever depicted, right? The darkening of Valinor is a big deal, but in a sense there's less leeway there. We know what happened, right? Ungoliant and Melkor and the trees, but this is the number of characters and the number of story arcs that this is going to impact and the role this is going to have on everything else. It's really huge. So it will be fun to think through, and I hope to do it with as much of your input as we can. Haakon wants to know what about Ingwe? Well, Ingwe's up on the mountain, right? So he doesn't live in Tirion anymore. So Ingwe and the Vanyar, I think, shouldn't be there. Yeah. So I think Ingwe we can leave out pretty much entirely, but yeah. Interesting. Yeah, Tony Mead says that the kinslaying is basically the Red Wedding of the Silmarillion. Kind of, in a sense, yeah. Definitely some parallels there. Oh, who breaks Fingolfin's sword? Nick, you're absolutely right. His sword needs to be broken. Under what circumstances? Yeah, whom does Fingolfin kill? Great question, right? What is exactly his role? He's got to be fighting. I think he's got to be. But anyway, all right. We'll leave it there. So thanks everybody for joining us. This was a really fun discussion today. Made lots of good progress, I think, and I look forward to talking about the kinslaying 2 weeks from today. So that'll be, what is that? In September, right? September 8th? So
I think that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, next week. First.
Yeah.
This is just like a brutal series of episodes to start this season.
It's tough. Yeah, these are really
it's just like having the Red Wedding over and over again on Game of Thrones.
Season 3 starts with a bang. It really does. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Okay, yeah, and this, I will say in advance, I might need to reschedule September 8th. It might actually be on the 8th. We might have to either put that off a week or do it a week sooner, or probably put it off a week, because I think I've got a thing on September 8th. I need to check my calendar. But anyway, very soon will be the next episode, so we'll sort that out. Keep an eye on your email for notification.
We won't leave you hanging.
We won't. So thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for listening, and Godspeed.